All right. So I would like to introduce Jessica Aubin. And Jessica is the founder of Aubin Speech and Language Center, which is located in Paulsbo, Washington, Silverdale, Washington,
We actually have a
in
couple locations. Yeah.
couple locations, and they also do stuff virtually. So Jessica will tell you more about what they do and then talk about voice. And Jessica is a speech and language pathologist who is the specialty therapy division that works with pretty much everything from your shoulders up. So, speech, swallowing, and cognition. So, a really great thing that a lot of people with Parkinson's may engage with at some point in their journey here. So I'm going to go away and I'm going to pass it on over to Jessica, and I'll be the monkey behind the curtain. Thank you for being here and doing this, Jessica.
You're welcome, Jen. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. One of my favorite things to do is to chat with people. Actually, that's why I became a speech language pathologist, because my favorite things on the planet are eating food and having great conversations with people. So I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with all of you today and talking a little bit about what's happening with Parkinson voice and what's happening maybe with you or with your loved one. And then we can each week, as we go through this series, we'll talk about more and more things that you can do to help yourself to be a really effective and good communicator, because that's the source of so much happiness. So I have some slides for you. I don't need to let any of these people in, right, Jen?
No, I've got that taken care of.
Okay, good. Well, let me put some slides up here. Oh, just by point of clarification, if anyone has a question for me throughout the presentation, just feel free to put it in the chat, or if you just want to unmute your microphone and ask me, that's also perfectly fine. Sometimes Zoom is new to people, so if you want to know how to unmute your microphone, there's a control bar in the bottom of your Zoom room. And on the far left, on the bottom, there's a little microphone icon. And right now it should be red with a line through it, meaning you're muted. And if you just click on that icon, it will unmute you, and then you'll be able to talk to me and ask questions. So so hope everybody can jump in if you have a question for me. All right, well, we are going to get started a little bit. We're going to be talking obviously about a clear voice and how essential it is for effective communication. One of the things that I hear all the time, so I've been working with people who have Parkinson's disease for the last 2 decades, and I hear this all the time, that other people complain about them, that they can't be heard, or that their spouse will complain that they can't be heard, or the person with Parkinson's disease will complain that the problem isn't actually them and it's their spouse who needs to get hearing aids. I'm sure you guys have all heard this a million times. And sometimes, wait a minute. I'm jumping ahead in a weird way here. Okay. Sometimes what happens is the person with Parkinson's disease feels like they are frustrated or annoyed because people are asking them to repeat all the time or saying that they can't hear. And so then they don't feel like getting out of their house and going to their club or their group or participating at church as much, because it's annoying when other people don't understand what you're saying and they just keep asking you to repeat or say it louder or different. And it's not very fun. You get kind of left out of the conversation. So communication is super important for being connected with people. And like I said, it's the thing that brings people closer together, right? So Very, very important to have that. So the other thing that's super important about being a good communicator is that it empowers you so that you can get what you want. So sometimes when you, I've seen this happen where someone is trying to get their point across, maybe about what they want for dinner, or maybe they don't like a certain caregiver and they don't want to work with that person, but they're just not having a good time getting their message across. And then when you fail at getting your message across a few times, sometimes people kind of give up on trying to let other people know what they actually want, because it's just so much work. It's just a big job to try to get everything communicated. So we don't want people giving up. We want people to be empowered to get what they want in life. So I feel like my slides are slightly out of order. Okay. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna just, Jennifer, I'm gonna check this one thing.
Okay.
Oh,
Stand by,
I
folks.
skipped this slide. Okay, understanding the why. Sorry about that. I was like, where did my slide? So we're going to be talking about the why today. We're going to be talking about why sometimes you can, maybe you've noticed that there are times when when something's super important to you, or you're mad, or there's something critical going on, and then all of a sudden your voice is clear and loud and everybody heard you and it was great. And then there are other times where you're, scooting through the kitchen and your spouse is like, what do you want? You clearly told them that you're just going to get a snack, and your spouse is like, what are you doing? I don't know what you want. So these things happen. So sometimes your voice is loud and clear and sometimes it's not. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the big picture. For there's two parts to Parkinson voice. One part is maintaining strength and clarity, like doing things that have a healthy voice, to have healthy lungs, to have healthy ability to project your voice. But then there's also this kind of cognitive part of it where you have to trick yourself into being loud. And that is the interaction of changes in your brain, from the dopamine levels changing, from your neurotransmitter chemistry changing, and different pathways that your brain uses to communicate. So we're going to go over that a little bit today. So now I'm back on track. I apologize, I was confused for a moment. The clear voice is essential for effective communication, and we all know that, and we've all had the experience where things didn't go right, and then you were frustrated because the communication wasn't there. And we've all had beautiful social connections, hanging out with our friends and our family, and then also I've gotten stories from my clients that I work with of many of them, used to be in a book club, or used to have like a weekly meetup with a group of friends. Some of them have been musicians where they would meet once a week to play music, and playing music is a wonderful thing to do if you have Parkinson's disease, because it helps you keep your skills, and it's social. But one of the problems that was happening was, like, in this social group that got together once a week in the coffee shop was really noisy. And then my client who had Parkinson's disease had a hard time being heard in this noisy coffee shop. And then they didn't feel like they were participating very well. And then they didn't feel like they should really even go, because they couldn't even engage or talk with people in the coffee shop, or be heard when they were trying to add to the conversation. So then they chose to drop out of that group because it was so hard to communicate in that setting. So those are things that people who have Parkinson's disease run into all the time. And it's something that we don't want for you. We want you going to the coffee shop and playing your instruments and participating with people. So, okay, so we're going to go over speaking exercises. And one of the things that's super valuable, like when you actually go to the coffee shop anyway, when you go and you participate with your book club, when you go and you participate with your church group and you help to make flower arrangements and you're talking with the other people there who are making flower arrangements, those things have kind of a global effect on your cognition, on your communication skills, on your mental sharpness, on your social well-being. And so staying engaged in those situations is really critical to a big picture of health. It's more than just good communication. It actually adds to your overall health in so many ways. So what speech language pathologists do, and so all of the clinicians who work for me are certified in Speak Out, and some of them are also certified in Lee Silverman voice therapy, which are two voice treatment protocols to help people to have a loud voice and be heard. However, there are many speech language pathologists that have those credentials. And part of working with a speech language pathologist is finding a person that you like to work with who has the skills that can help you. And so, you know, that's part of the deal, is finding the right person who can help you. So when we work with people, we definitely talk with them about there are certain specific voice exercises that we'll do, which we'll cover in greater detail next week. But also, there's a neurology behind communicating well. So one of the things that any Speak Out provider can teach you about is that there are different neurologic pathways that you use for communication. So when something is, you have pyramidal and extrapyramidal pathways in your brain for communication. So when things are kind of routine and not important, the effort that goes into that communication becomes more automatic, right? And it becomes less, it's in these moments where you have this kind of like routine conversation that your voice can trail off. You start out talking strong, and then by the end of it, your voice can wanders off and it's really hard to understand. So that is a really common pattern with Parkinson's disease, is that when you're dealing with these kind of automatic daily communications, they're not significant enough. And so they deteriorate quickly, and you think in your head that you're being just as loud as you ever were before. In your body, it feels like you're being just as loud at the end of the sentence that you were at the beginning of the sentence. But in fact, it's not like that. And so that's one reason why in therapy, we record people. We actually make a video recording of them talking and having a conversation, so that we can then play it back to them and they can see for themselves what's actually happening. Because inside of your body feels normal, but then what is actually getting produced comes out differently. So this is a really great activity that you can do with your spouse or a friend, or even just yourself. You can record yourself having a conversation and check to see, is my volume loud enough? Am I clear enough? And do I actually sound the way that I think that I should sound? So that's something that any person, regardless of where you are in the world, you can record yourself and just do a check-in. This is what we do in therapy. One of the very first things we will do when we get your assessment data, we'll make a recording of you talking. And the purpose of that recording is so that we can have you look at your own communication and determine for yourself if it's working or not. And then also it gives us a before therapy measure and an after therapy measure of your progress, so you can see how you're doing so much better. So that's why we do that. So we're just talking a little bit about pyramidal and extrapyramidal tracts. So when you have this automatic speech, it's really common for people's voices to just get a lot softer and kind of piddle out at the end. But you might notice that sometimes there's a situation where you get angry or something's very important, and then all of a sudden you have like superpowers of communication and you're projecting and everyone can hear you and every single word is perfectly clear. Maybe some of you have had that experience. So the difference between that situation and the automatic situation is just the neurologic pathway that your communication message is taking. So when you have when you're putting more intent and more volume and intent into your message, it kind of, instead of going through multiple communication centers, relay centers in your brain, it just takes a little more of a direct path, and then your communication and volume improves. So go through this. Okay. My slides here. So that's one thing that's really important to understand, is that you just have different neurologic pathways in your brain, and depending on how much purpose or intent you put into your communication message, you can override the basal ganglia control circuit, which is where you are running into the shortage of neurotransmitters that result in reduced movements. So your message isn't very clear. So I'm closing my chat box, it's distracting. Oh. Okay. So one of the things that's super important is that when you do voice therapy, one of the goals of voice therapy is to teach you how to always be communicating with intent and with purpose, and putting lots of energy into your speech and communication, so that it stays consistently clear and loud. We don't want you to sound like you're screaming at everyone. I get that from people a lot too, where they're like, well, I'm just a gentle person. I don't like yelling at people. I don't want them to feel bad. People say this to me all the time. I don't want to make anybody feel bad by yelling at them. And I have to really promise them that if you put more energy into your speech, it's not going to come across in an angry way. It'll just come across in a good way where people can hear you. So there can be a little bit of that sometimes. And that's another reason for recording yourself while you're doing your exercises at home, or recording yourself if your partner isn't sure that they are loud enough, or if sometimes people are worried they're too loud. So that's another reason to record yourself and see if too loud actually sounds too loud. So Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurologic condition. So what that means is that once you get that diagnosis, you need to commit to exercising and doing things that will keep your you need to commit to exercising and to doing things that are going to keep your volume up for your whole life. It's not like sometimes people have the idea that they're going to do an exercise class, or that they're going to do a speak out one time and be done with it. It's not like that. It's something that you have to commit to doing on a consistent and regular basis for the rest of your life, because you're fighting against the progressive nature of a condition. And so you have to just keep putting it in every single day. So one of the problems that is a challenge for people with Parkinson's disease is that as the chemistry in their brain is changing, and as the dopamine level that are affecting communication are decreasing, those dopamine levels also affect your motor control and your motivation to do stuff. So one of the problems is that physical movement and talking and communication gets harder, but also the motivation to put yourself out there and do those things also gets harder, because the chemistry in your brain has changed. It has to do with the dopamine levels in your brain changing, and that is also working against your motivation to get stuff done. So when you have Parkinson's disease, it's super important to find external motivators, and to create routines and habits that become the guide for keeping you going, right? So it is a lifelong commitment. I mentioned briefly earlier about the basal ganglia control circuit. Who can I just like really quickly, you can raise your hands. I'm gonna just make my screen big here so I can see you guys. Just either raise your hands really quickly or put something in the chat, but who knows about the basal ganglia control circuit? Like, do you guys want me to elaborate on what that is, or am I speaking a foreign language when I say basal ganglia control circuit?
That could be helpful.
That would be helpful. Okay, I will tell you what the basal ganglia control circuit is. Good. Thank you so much for that. I always like a check-in because sometimes you just don't know what people already know. Okay, so in your brain, when you relay a communication, your frontal lobe, so you have a lot of lobes in your brain. You have your frontal lobe, you have your parietal lobes. Inside, deep inside your brain, you have your thalamus and your basal ganglia. So when we talk about the brain, the part in the very middle of your brain is the oldest part of your brain. And that's the part of your brain that controls all those primitive reflexes, and like your fight or flight drive is in there. So, so when we talk about, and their messages come into your brain and get relayed to different centers in your brain to create a complete communication circuit. So your frontal lobe is responsible for decision-making skills and for deciding to do it or not do it, or you know how sometimes you have the ice cream and you really want dessert and you eat your bowl of ice cream and then you think, should I have more ice cream? And so your frontal lobe is the thing that comes in and goes, well, you probably had enough ice cream today, you should put the rest away. When it's not working well, then maybe you just eat the whole tub of ice cream. So that's your frontal lobe. It helps you to inhibit behaviors or things that need to get inhibited. It's also the decision-making part of your brain. In the parietal lobe, that's where your language can be formed. And so when you have an idea, you form the idea in the language centers in your brain, and then you have to send that signal to your motor strip along the top of your brain to formulate how your tongue, lips, and jaw are going to move to produce the sounds needed to communicate your idea, right? And the basal ganglia comes involved too. It goes to the kind of primitive center in your brain. And this is a part of the brain that that regulates like the dopamine levels, the amount of energy that needs to go into a message to properly communicate it, right? So when you're communicating, the message lights up several parts of your brain before it comes out, and that's what happens when you have we were talking briefly about kind of those everyday automatic speech tasks, right? You go through there. And your dopamine levels in your brain, as you use up movement, as you use up kind of repetitively go through speech patterning, those dopamine levels decrease. And there's less dopamine there, and it causes the size of the movements that you're making to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then over time, it causes sometimes it isn't necessarily volume per se, but it's the reduced range of movement that creates speech that's very hard to understand, because it just sort of turns into a mumble and disappears. So when you have we'll just go over this slide. The difference between the indirect and direct pathways in the basal ganglia is the thing that we're tapping into when you have consistently clear communication with no mumbling versus when that atrophy sets in and your speech kind of deteriorates away into mumbling. So when we work with you, we're trying to retrain you to consistently have a direct communication pathway and a clear speech. Okay. Okay, so there we go. So people one of the things that's hard with Parkinson's disease is that self-monitoring of your speech. And that's because of the dopamine changes in your brain. That's because of the sorry about this. I keep having pop-ups on my screen. Do you guys ever have that problem where you have a pop-up and you're like, I can't find my button? Okay, so one of the hardest things for a person with Parkinson's disease is to actively monitor their speech when they're communicating, because their dopamine levels are changing. They have fatigue. Maybe they were up all night because their leg was wiggling and they didn't sleep well. You're tired. Like moving. When you have Parkinson's disease, your body uses a ton more energy than before because you have all these extra movements. Sometimes the medications that you're taking can actually cause extra movements itself. If your medication is a little bit on the strong side, it can cause extra movements, but those extra movements still burn energy. And so that can create fatigue, and that fatigue can contribute to the difficulty of self-monitoring. It makes it harder to know that you're consistently being a loud and clear communicator because you just have a lot more stuff going on that's taxing your ability to pay attention. So one of the things that we want to do is do things that increase your ability to actively monitor your own speech patterns and make adjustments to your speech patterns, and tapping into a direct communication pathway instead of going through the basal ganglia control circuit. So we want to kind of skip that center of the brain, and we just want to make it more intentional. So before you start talking to someone, you have an idea in your head that you want to communicate. And so you start thinking like, okay, how am I going to communicate this idea to someone? And then your brain has to execute on it. So that's where your motor movements have to be big enough that the message gets relayed. And then after you're done communicating, you have to be able to reflect. You look at the other person and you're like, did they get the message? Or maybe you didn't look at the other person. Maybe you just looked at your spouse and got mad at them for not clearly understanding them in the first place. But normally there's this moment of reflection that happens after you communicate to go, did that message get across? So one of the primary things that you will do in a voice therapy is just working on that self-awareness. Now, like I said, if you're not working with a speech therapist, or if maybe you just live in a place where you're far away from resources, you could actually do some of this on your own by recording yourself, or by getting a communication partner who sits down with you for 15 minutes every single day and just gives you some feedback on how was that. You can get sentences and read them. So there's a lot of resources out there, and you can do a lot of these things on your own. Speak Out has a tremendous website with daily exercise programs where you could just go to their website and get those things and go through them. So, okay, I'm going to my next slide. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Reward cues. So when we talk about neurologic pathways, extrapyramidal, pyramidal communication tracks, One of the things that helps to consistently have good volume is enhanced motivation. So this is a reference from Kojovic, Dr. Kojovic, who studied deep brain stimulation, and he showed that that's a whole nother topic, deep brain stimulation, but there are things that enhance motivation and modulation of movement, right? So we know that like decreasing dopamine levels decreases motivation to communicate. It also decreases awareness of how big your movements are. It decreases awareness of how loud you are, and decreases your ability to self-regulate. So this was sort of like the basis for deep brain stimulation, is that we know that when deep brain stimulation happens, motivation improves to act on all the things you need to act on. So you can also introduce external motivators in the form of social motivators, groups, participating in groups, and routines. So also it can be helpful to incorporate rewards or incentives into what you're doing, so that you celebrate your successes. When you do something right, getting called out on that is really helpful. It's motivating for people to get acknowledged for their achievements and benefits. So if you're a spouse and you're with your partner, when they do put the energy into being loud and communicating with you, just be like, thank you so much, I got that. That's a motivator. That is a natural reward for great communication, is when you have a validating partner who says, thank you, I got it. So make sure that if you are a partner or a spouse, that you are doing that for them. Okay. So motivations. So this, we've covered a lot of things here. So sometimes my voice and volume are perfectly clear, and other times it's just not. How many of you, I'm just kind of curious, how many of you experience that, where you can go back to your show of hands? Raise your hand if you've experienced, sometimes I'm loud and sometimes I'm not good. Yeah, pretty much close to everybody. Thank you so much. It's really a thing and it's frustrating, right? Because you feel like you're being the same amount of loud all the time. And you're like, well, that time it worked and this time it didn't. So what was going on? And so what's happening is that the intent and the pathway that we need to get that volume is just not getting accessed. So that's something that it really helps to have a coach. It really helps to have either a video of yourself or a coach, or some other objective way to see and practice, so that you get a new sense of how much energy goes into creating that consistency. And just like any skill, how many of you, I'm just curious, you guys can raise your hands again. How many of you played a sport when you were younger? Like, whether it was basketball or soccer or swimming or any kind of a sport? Okay, good. How many of you? Good. Okay, thank you. I knew it. We have some athletes in the group. So how many of you played a musical instrument when you were growing up or with the band? Oh, yes. Then we have some musicians in the group too. Okay, this is awesome. All right, so we have athletes and musicians here. That's very good to know. So all of you athletes and musicians know that you have to practice it in order to get it right. And that perfect practice makes perfect. So the more that you practice your skill, the more you're able to get a feel for what position your body needs to be in, how much energy you have to put into the thing in order to produce the sound out of your instrument, or in order to produce the motor behavior to get the ball in the target, right? And so this is the same thing with your physical therapy, with your speech therapy. You're gonna have to practice the skill of getting out there, and you have to relearn in your body what it feels like to use that intention when you're communicating, so that you can consistently be loud and heard, and that you don't end up with a situation where sometimes you're fine and sometimes you're not, right? And then there's also a component of it that comes from the time of day and how close to when the last time you took your medications were. That definitely plays a role too. So you have to practice with that. You have to practice at different times of the day, because if you're communicating with someone if you're communicating with someone right before your next medication dose, the energy and the effort that you put into it are going to be much, much greater than right after you've taken your medication. So you have to practice with that a little bit at different times of the day, and you really have to get feedback going. You cannot rely on yourself to know, am I being loud enough? Am I being clear enough? You just have to know that part, the self-regulation part of your brain, the basal ganglia, is key in self-regulation, because it allows you to get that, feedback. You just have to know that part is broken, and you're going to have to rely on a different way. You're going to have to rely on videos, feedback from other people, and practice. You're going to have to just really drill it until you have a new sense. What we're trying to do is create a new sense of how loud is loud enough for you. So that is okay. So that's really the big key. Okay, so take away things that I want you to do. This is the homework stuff that I want each of you to be doing. And it doesn't matter if you've done this in the past, because every day is a new day. Every day is a new. So when you get up, you have to do your exercises every day. So your homework is to record yourself and listen to it. That's what I want you to do. And then actually next week, I'll be back. I'm going to ask all of you if you did it. I'm going to come up with something I'll give you. Might be an electronic file, but you'll love it. I'm going to give you a treat if you did your homework of recording yourself and listening to it, to see if how you think you sound is how you actually sound. That's the purpose of recording yourself. So that's what I want everybody to do this week. And something else that would be super helpful to do, you can write visual reminders and place them around your house. So after you record yourself and you listen to it, determine, am I using all of the skills and knowledge that I have to be intentional and loud? And if not, then put those visual reminders in key places around your house where you tend to drop off. So it might be in the kitchen or the dinner table. Then you need to, maybe you can figure out a cute way to put a visual reminder there to keep your volume up. It might be, you might find that you run into the trouble while you're sitting in front of the television, watching television, and your spouse likes to sit in that nice cushy chair next to you. And you're watching television and it's great. And then you lean over to your wife and you're like, hey, I'd like to get some popcorn. And they have no idea what you just said. So that maybe is a good place to put a little reminder note to keep your volume up. Okay. And then another thing that is super valuable would be to join a support group. There are free Parkinson voice support groups all over the place. And a lot of them are virtual and online. So there's really and because all of you are with me virtually right now, I know that there is absolutely no reason why any of you couldn't join a weekly Speak Out Loud Crowd group. And I'm happy to provide some links to our group. We have a weekly Loud Crowd group that meets every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And I know that the Project Voice on the Speak Out website also has multiple virtual Loud Crowd groups that meet at various times during the week. So there are lots of, and there are other organizations as well that have weekly groups, but those groups are really, really good at helping with your motivation. And so if you are not already in a group, join one. And then the key, right? So sometimes, I'll go back a slide. Sometimes you're perfectly clear and other times you're not. So when you are perfectly clear, you are speaking with intent. So you want to make sure that every single time you're communicating, you're speaking with intent. And that is the other thing. Now, speaking with intent usually requires some practice, because it's like learning how to play an instrument or learning how to sing or learning how to play a sport. You have to learn what that feels like inside of your body in order to be able to produce it. So that's why joining a group or working one-on-one with a therapist can help you learn what that feels like inside of your body to do it. But if you don't have access to those things right away, then you can record yourself and practice putting more energy, just really placing the sound of what you're trying to say right over the top of your head. So as you put more effort and energy into your communication, that is how you override the extra, that's how you get a direct neurologic line, so you don't have as many things going on that will make your voice piddle off by the end, right? So we want to have a direct pathway in your brain. So, okay, I'm going to answer any questions that you have, because I'm out of slides now. Do you guys have, I'll go back a slide. I like this slide more. Here. Do you have questions for me? I'm going to look in the chat for questions. We're going to wrap up.
So someone talked about the Parkinson's Voice Project doing it every day from 10 a.m. And how about, do you want to stop sharing your slide and we'll get everybody up here, or, we'll do that. So couple things. Oh, I guess I could turn my video back on. Hello, everybody. So couple things, like think about if you have questions, and you're welcome to unmute yourself. The other bit is the suggestions that Jessica has talked about and kind of the homework I'll be sending out to you in a post-event email, along with the recording of this session. I know there were some technical difficulties, so some of it was challenging. So we'll see if we can work that out, and I'll send out the slides that Jessica has. So any questions from the audience that is here? Please repeat how to use the more direct mental pathway for speaking was one of the.
Oh, yes. How do you use the more direct mental pathway? Okay. So in order to tap into that direct pathway, the whole simple idea is to speak with intent. When you put more purpose and intent into your speech, you tap that direct pathway, and that's the whole thrust. And I'll elaborate more on this as I cover Speak Out protocol and the LSVT protocols next week. Those two voice treatment programs are slightly different from one another. They have slightly different things, although there's a lot of overlap between them too. But the whole thing that you do is to speak with intent, and it overrides the extrapyramidal pathways so that you end up with a direct neurologic pathway, and your speech will be consistently clear. So that is the whole thing that you practice and drill in Speak Out. An LSVT protocol also encourages people to be loud. So sometimes by increasing volume, what you're really doing is increasing the energy that you're putting into your speech. And as you do that, you make your communication intentional, and you can override all the extra that causes you to lose the clarity of your communication, right? So part of it could be, you may notice at home, this would be an idea too. You kind of keep track of, is your communication clear when it's novel and important? Or is your communication clear when it's like the same old, and you're like, yeah, again, I need a new glass. Well, actually, no person that I know with Parkinson's disease ever asked for a glass of water. I usually have to force it on them, I'll be honest. But usually people want the remote control, or they want to call someone. And when you're kind of asking for those things, if it's not intentional, if you're not directing your speech at the person you want to communicate with, that's when it tends to kind of trail off, and you lose that clarity. Did I answer that question well for you?
So some of it is this kind of trying to retrain your brain. It's like it's almost like thinking before doing, right? Being like, okay, I'm about to say something. I'm gonna say it in the way that I want it to come out. So it's almost that like retraining yourself to like stop for a split second and then really project. And if you're not projecting, stopping and starting over. Is that what I'm hearing you say, kind of?
That's exactly. You're retraining your brain. And it's the same concept with walking or with any type of movement. When you you have to really put energy into it. You have to say, and now I'm going to take a really big step, or like that first step after you stand up and you got to make it to the door. That first step has got to be a big one, or you know, in order to get the whole caboodle going in the right direction, right? So it's the same thing with speech. You're going to put a lot of intention. You're like, it's not just, I want to go out for dinner. It's, I want to go out for dinner. So you're going to put a lot of energy into that. Next week, I'm going to spend some time actually going through the exercises with you. We're going to practice doing some of these exercises together and having you practice to some degree your ability to put that intention into your communication. And we're going to also, I will show you the difference a little bit between LSVT and Speak Out, because those are the two big voice programs that get the best outcomes for people who have Parkinson's disease. And one of the things with LSVT is that that whole system is really designed around recalibrating in your brain. How much energy does it take? And then we try to embed speaking activities into cognitively challenging activities so that it becomes, so that being loud and being purposeful in your speech becomes automatic, right? So, and that's where the practice comes in, and that's where the art of embedding good communication skills into everyday life. That's where that art comes in, because in everyday life, like, you have to work really hard to create an intentional communication setup, right? In everyday life, you're cooking dinner, or you're getting ready to go to your next appointment, or maybe you're getting ready to have your friend come over, but you don't have 100% of your attention on communication all the time, right? And at home, you don't have 100% of your intention on walking across the room necessarily. So that's part of what we're going to talk about next week, is like, how do you get to the place where it's not so effortful? I mean, it's just sort of like learning how to drive a car. I'm sure most of you drive or learned how to drive a car once upon a time, but in the beginning, I have a 17-year-old daughter, okay? She just learned how to drive the car. I just remember teaching her how to drive the car. In the beginning, it was terrifying, okay? We got in the car and she had to think about every single movement to make the car go, to turn the car, to use the turn signals at the right time. There was a lot of intention that went into learning that thing. But then over time, the more you do it, it becomes automatic again. And now she's driving the car all over the place, and she's a great driver. She's probably the best driver in the area. I'm bragging about my kid now, but you get my point, is that each one of us we start out intentional, and we have to practice and do it enough that it's not such a heavy lift. And then the other thing with Parkinson's disease, because you are working against the progressive nature of Parkinson's disease, you do have to regularly be checking back in and regularly be readjusting. Am I still being loud enough? Am I still putting enough intention and energy into this? So that's kind of the ongoing battle. And it is a battle. Like, you have to fight for your ability to do all of the things that you love and want to do. And you have to just keep putting it there, because it is so much easier to maintain what you have than to try to regain it after it is lost. So we're going to have a big lecture next week about all of that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why we're doing this, is because we want to keep it maintained before it's lost. I've seen so many people like who lose some ability of speaking, and it's really hard to get back versus not losing that ability at the beginning. So this week was about kind of grounding on this, right? Grounding on the concept of, why did this happen? Why does this happen in a Parkinson's brain? And then next week, we're going to dive into more of the practical, like what can you do about it? Is that right, Jessica?
Exactly. And I just wanted to answer one more thing that popped up in the chat.
Yes.
And that is that in the morning, oftentimes voice and movement is better. And then by the end of the day, it gets worse. It's super common. That happens all the time. And the reason for that is because as you move throughout the day, you have used up your cognitive energy for the day. So we're going to talk later, we'll talk more and more about cognitive resource allocation, but you have to think of your cognitive energy like a bank. You only have so much money in the bank. And as you move through the day, if you use up all your energy by the afternoon, your attention, your physical energy, all of the things have been depleted. And so it's a lot harder to be a good communicator. It's a lot harder to have good balance and walk easily in the afternoons than it is in the morning. That's a thing. And we can talk a little bit more about that next week too. There are some actual little exercises that you can do to kind of give yourself a boost in the afternoon, and we'll make sure to bring that up. In fact, I'll write that down. We're going to cover it next week.
Okay. Well, and we have 3 weeks after this. So each one is going to kind of build on each other. So we are over time, which is okay. You all stuck around, so that's great. I will be sending out the slides and some resources, your homework assignment that I'm going to get from Jessica. And I will put that in an email to you. And you'll get it either later this week or early, like Monday of next week. So, and then we'll be back together, same time, same Zoom link next week. And the video will also be posted on the YouTube channel. So you can revisit it if you want, but you'll have the slides as well. So anything before we end, anything else you want to say, Jessica?
No, thank you all of you for being here. This was super fun. Next week, we'll hopefully get to know each other a lot better, and then I'll be able to really address the things that are important to you. But we're going to go over a lot of exercises and give you some tips that will be helpful that you can do every single day at home. So, yeah. All
right. Well, for those of you in the Northwest, or at least in the Washington area, it's a lovely rainy day. For the rest of you elsewhere, I hope that you have better weather than we have here. And we will see you next week. Thank you for being here. You have feedback for Jessica and myself, you're welcome to email us, and we'll just see you next week, okay? Take care, everybody. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.